Another way to love your wife, in the same way husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body. But what we naturally do is we feed and care for our bodies just as Christ does the church. We are members of his body. So the question here is, how can you love your wife as your own body? I'm going to let you wrestle with that. Maybe the way I want you to think about it is, how can you love your wife's body? And yes, that's where we're going. But your wife is different than mine, so I'll let you wrestle with that. I won't ask, you don't have to share with anybody if you don't want on this one. Some of the same things apply here, don't they? It's part of it's knowing your wife and how she likes to be loved. Your wife might want you more to tell her what you think of her body positively than to touch her, right? So my wife and I just found out that there's a Wells marriage retreat this weekend in Green Lake. My wife and I had gone to one of those marriage retreats a number of years ago, and I was almost put to shame, although the point of the example wasn't to put anybody to shame, but there was this gentleman who I believe had been married over 50 years, and Pastor Hunter, Randy Hunter from Middleton, who was leading the retreat, knew this man and asked him to share with everybody how he compliments his wife daily. And he literally wrote a note every day for over 50 years to his wife about something that he liked. Now, I did hear about something similar in another way and said, well, try to make it a new thing like once a week. Because if you try to do it new every day, you after a while, you're out. So I still remember the first note I wrote to my wife, and it was in jest, "I love your earlobes." It was just kind of a funny joke. But then all of a sudden, something struck us, and we probably don't do it every single day now, but we've got little notebooks and we write notes to each other every day before bed. And it's not always a compliment. It's usually a little bit more of a recap of the day. But here's what it does, is it forces me to think of one thing that I appreciate about my wife every day. And it might be, thank you for ironing my shirts, or whatever the case may be, right? But I get to think about that. Now, part of that might be, why is she so worried about the way her body looks? Well, she's mostly worried about what I think. Now, unfortunately, I think I found a challenge. She still cares more about what she thinks than what I think. Her own view has more influence there, but there's an opportunity. Let me ask you a question, though, and I do want you to answer this one. Why do you have sex? I'll ask it a different way. For whom, for whose benefit do you have sex? Isn't it? You're giving the real answer. The guy who said hers, I would like him to come and finish this off for us. Better man than I am. Yeah. Oh, he came from best sex ever. Yeah, right. The natural tendency, isn't it, is I want to have sex so that you can meet my needs. Now, let's be very clear. God created sex. God has given you healthy sexual desire, and having sex fulfills those desires. Except sex is the number one opportunity for the two to become one flesh, for each of us to submit to one another and to meet the needs of the other. Right? And so the act may not change at all, but what's going on your mind may very well need to change, where this is more about me meeting your needs. And now, what if? Because we're always worried about, well, what if I meet her needs and she doesn't meet mine? Well, aren't yours usually coming first anyway? Let's be honest. Right? So that doesn't really happen. But what's the answer? Do you need sex to be happy? Think about our keynote again this morning. Your happiness comes from God. And the more God has filled your heart, the more able you are to then serve your wife, even when she doesn't acknowledge it, she doesn't appreciate it, she doesn't return the favor. But sex, usually, it'd be pretty hard. I think you'd almost have to work hard to have sex and walk away with absolutely no satisfaction on either person's part. Right? That's just not how God's designed it. But it's a good example of putting the other first. I forgot to share with you before What happened to me a couple of weeks ago as I was thinking about this, just thinking about the concept that we talked about earlier about dying for my wife every day. So I got home, and my wife was gone. I don't remember where she was or what she was doing, but the dryer was running, and my wife typically does the laundry, and the dryer stopped running. It wasn't broken. It finished the cycle. But what went through my mind? I should probably fold the clothes, but I don't want to. And I'm not kidding. That literally went through my mind. I was lying on the bed after lunch. I usually take about a 10-minute break right after lunch, relax a little bit before I jump back into it. And I thought, and I consciously thought, I just don't want to do it. So what do? Well, that's a good time to put yourself to death and to do it anyway and to ask for God to help. Maybe the same thing applies here.